Growing up as a child of an alcoholic, any family with addiction, there is traumas. There's the whole family system that gets created, and depending on what part of the recipe you are, it can be really traumatic. For me, I was the scapegoat, and that continued. That still really continues today. My family still tries to use me as a scapegoat. So my name is Brad Griffith. I am a grateful recovering addict. I've been in recovery now for about 4.5 years. I really struggled with addiction from the time I first picked up a substance, but I didn't really identify it until I was prescribed painkillers for a back injury at the age of 25. It was 3 weeks after my youngest daughter was born. So I had a baby in the house at that time that was really making me think about my life as a whole and where we were at. So just after a few months of the prescription, I had realized I was addicted and I needed help. So I spent the next 5 years trying to make my own help and self-medicate myself, listening to all the stigmas that are in society, if I'm using MAT, I'm just trading one drug for another, or if I'm involved with counseling, it means I'm crazy or I'm not strong enough to handle my problems. I had to put all that stuff aside and start listening to the people who were here, the professionals who were telling me about setting up boundaries and gaining some self-respect. So that's what brought me here. So I had listened to the stigma in my head that when I was on Suboxone, I was trading one drug for another. So I began to use other substances to help get me off of Suboxone, which turned into problems with other substances on top of the opioids. But I was off of Suboxone and everything for probably 3 months. And then the first big life event that happened, I had started a new job. I ran into a couple of old friends that I had worked with and used with before. And within a couple days of starting this new job, I was back to using the substances that I swore I was never going to use again. And this time, that run was much worse than the ones before it. Things continued to get worse. I lost a piece of myself each time I decided to go back out. But even in these past, 5.5 years, I had a return to use in the very beginning, within the first 4 weeks of my recovery. Not beating myself up that was a relapse, and having a counselor distinguish the difference between a relapse and a return to use helped me tremendously to see that, I had a return to use. It's okay. I'm not going back to all these old behaviors. I can get right back on now, get right back on track. But that was also something I had to come to terms with this run after I relapsed to that time of going back to work. Again, I was trying to treat myself and recover myself, but things continued to go downhill until I was finally willing to open up and come to CASA-Trinity or New Dawn and check myself into rehab. That's really what I needed to do. So I was trying to, after I identified that I was addicted to painkillers, I was relapsing and trying to get sober for 5 years. During those 5 years, I was trying to get sober for my children. I was doing everything I could for my children. And it wasn't until I came into rehab and met a peer support specialist for the first time, and they mentioned how I needed to do it for myself. At that time, I didn't want to do it for myself. I didn't think that I deserved it, but regaining some of that self-respect and self-worth by identifying things in my life that were traumatic versus things that were part of my disease of addiction versus the things that are truly who I am. And with the help of a professional, getting to know myself for the first time, getting in touch with myself really for the first time, that had a huge effect. And then I was able to use my daughters as my reason to remain sober. I couldn't use them as my reason to get sober. I had to have some self-respect and some self-worth to want to do it for myself. But once I did gain some of that self-respect, my children are definitely what keep me sober today. So I've been sober for a little over 4.5 years, and what has brought me the most joy has definitely been rebuilding the relationships with my daughter's old friends and regaining some hope back into my life. I'm a non-traditional college student now. I thought that when I dropped out that I was just going to, that was the end. But I'm pursuing, a bachelor's degree now. I have a career with CASA-Trinity. Those things are really important because they weren't on my radar. They weren't ever possibilities. So when we get in our heads and we think that things aren't possible, we got to decipher that that's the disease talking to us, because these things are possible. I've met renowned psychologists and have formed relationships with some professional people. 4.5 years ago, I never thought I had any business dealing with. There is hope. We do still have a future after addiction. Addiction does not have to be a death sentence. When we listen to the professionals and listen to the advice that's being given us by these people, we really got to make a decision. Are we comfortable enough where we're at to not want to be uncomfortable, or is the decision to be a little uncomfortable worth it to change our lives?